Hello, my name is Caleb Wharton. I've been tasked with implementing a mechanic designed by one of my peers into this tile-based game project called Tournamental. The mechanic I've introduced is the Reveal the Way mechanic. The mechanic was originally designed by Thomas Morin. I'll go ahead and open up the project file here and play through the levels to show you guys. The Reveal the Way mechanic will just highlight the areas where there's an actual path for the player to move. This works in combination with my mechanic, the worn out tile, by allowing the player, it doesn't reveal the worn out tiles, and the player still has to surpass that to get to their next pool. So as you can see, there's the revealed pathways, and the worn out tiles are cracking as we get close. Getting past level 1. I made level 1 a little bit easier, having more reveal uses, just so the player can get used to it and get more of a feel for this. This level has more of a cap on how much stamina the player can use. Player isn't smart about which way they push each interactable, they won't have enough stamina to finish this level. There we go. And then on to the last level, you bring it all together, you use a couple different balls to surpass these areas. Here, I'll show you. If you push this too early as well, you will have to restart the level because you can't interact and you can't get past that. So grab that use. This level as well has a more difficult stamina cap to it as well. If the player doesn't push the balls or the boxes in the right direction, then they might not have enough stamina to finish the level. And then after the third level, it takes you to the level sandbox, where the player can just mess around, and after they beat this level, they just continue to repeat this. This just helps you get kind of a hold for the mechanics themselves, and you can kind of test them out. There you are. Now that I've shown you how the mechanic itself works, I'm going to go through each of the components that I used here. So, the only blueprints that I needed to make were the interactable reveal ability right here. Going into tiles, we had to make a reset pit tile and an invisible tile. A couple of these other tiles I edited, like the tile floor. I made it a box to make it look like it was a pillar instead of just a floating platform. Going into the reset pit tile, the components I have are just the regular base plane. That was just to act as a kind of a zero spot for me to know where the floors should be, and then adding in the base floor plane. This is just where the lava is, the bottom of the pit, etc., etc. The invisible tile also has the same components as that, the base plane, the floor plane for the lava, and then I added a cube to make it have a pillar with an invisible tile. Both the invisible tile and the cube are using a translucent material that I created. If you go to textures or materials, I created a transparent material here, or translucent, sorry, and I used an opacity amount. And if we go into invisible tile, I can show you. And all we're doing is setting the scalar perimeter for the opacity amount and changing that by lerping it using timelines. That's how we achieve our set visible and our blink. So that's it for the invisible tile. The only other things that we do in here are do the same for the cube. So we do it for the invisible tile, the cube, and we have to initialize it at the begin play as well. So initializing the opacity amount to be 0 so that they're both invisible. We're going to get all of the wall actors, and we're going to set the wall's visibility. So any walls that are bordering these invisible tiles will be set invisible so that they don't give away any positions. I used the same method that I think Thomas used. I used a for each loop for all of the wall tiles, and then I branched it to see if it was a wall tile, if it was a neighbor to the up, down, left, right, and if it was valid. And then if it was, I would set it true, and then I would send a message called hide wall tile. And what hide wall tile does is go into the wall. All we're doing is setting is wall hidden to true and setting the opacity to 0, because we're going to use a we would use a translucent material for this as well. Alright. So other than that, that's it for the invisible tile. The invisible tile itself was not super difficult. The event blink and event set visible are triggered in the player pawn. The player pawn does these when it does the input action revealability. So we're going to check the revealability array, and I believe we set that up here. We get the worn out tiles array, we get the revealability array, we're going to initialize an invisible tiles array and the wall tiles. Set those all up into an array. We're going to do for each loop through the revealabilities, check to see if they have interacted already, and if that's true, then you're going to set it to has not interacted, etc., etc. Array element, we're going to go through each array element, check the abilities used, and we're going to add that into the total uses. So if it has interacted, and that's true, then we're going to set that to not interact, or has not interacted, so it doesn't go through this again, and doesn't add in the abilities more than once. After that's completed, we just go down here to check the total uses. As long as they're above 0, then we're going to go through the true branch. If they're false, then we're just going to print string that says no uses available, enable input. The player will see on the HUD as well that the uses are down to 0. Through the true branch, all it will do is decrement the total uses. It'll spawn the reveal sound, and it will go through the for each loop for the invisible tiles and send that message to set visible. Then I'll go through the wall tiles, send the message to set visible. And then I'll delay 4 seconds because that's the amount of time that it takes for the set visible for this timeline to wrap up. It's a 4-second timeline. After that 4-second delay, we go on to the blink timeline. And the blink timeline, all it does is goes through all the invisible tiles as well, makes them blink, and then I have it delayed for 1.5 seconds. Doesn't really matter if you have the delay there at the end. You can honestly delete it. I had more code going after that, but so the invisible tile here for the blink, all we have it doing is kind of doing on, up, down, so on and so forth, getting a little bit closer towards the end, giving it this blinking effect. And for the first timeline, the set visible, all we're doing is a 1 second kind of fade in to show that the tile's there. Okay. And we have the same timelines for both of the cube and the invisible tile for this. Alright. Other than the reveal ability input for the player pawn, the only other thing that we did in player pawn is check the total uses. For this, we go through a for each loop, going through the reveal ability array, checking again to see has it been interacted with. It has. Alright, set this to has not been interacted with. Check the abilities used. We're essentially using the same code that we used right here, only putting it down here so that every time the player picks up the ability, essentially, let's see here, we're done with that. Every time the player picks up the ability, it will send them this message to run through this event and check each of the abilities, tally them up, keep it up to date. Okay, done with the player pawn. Onto the reveal ability. The reveal ability, we go into begin play. We're going to initialize the uses to 0. I got the player to use and set a variable to player just to have. Okay, going into the interact event. If the ability uses are equal to 0 for this reveal ability, then we're going to set it to has interacted. And then that will allow it to go through each of those in those for each loops to add in the abilities used that it has. So we're going to toggle the interact to uninteractable, disable input, play the sound effect. This is just going to shrink the orb down to I have it from 0.5 shrinking down to 0.1 all around. And then this is just incrementing, well, not incrementing, but adding in the ability uses. We have it to 0. Ability uses added. We're going to have it at 2. And then this is just a particle effect, just a poof particle effect that I made with the Niagara systems. Just a basic impact effect. We're going to set the sphere hidden and make the tile enterable. And then after that, we get the player pawn, and we're going to send that message, check total uses. So when it's picked up, it'll send that message, check the total uses, so that way when the player interacts with it, then it's updated for the total uses. Okay, we're going to check to see if this sound effect is valid. If it is, then we're going to stop it, fade it out. If it's not, then we're not going to worry about it, go on to just re-enabling the input. Okay. That's about it with the reveal ability. And onto the reset tile. So in the reset tile, we got the entering object, and we're going to disable the input, go into getting the actor's location. We're going to set a fall distance. So we go into spawn the sound. We're going to check to see if the player equals the entering object. If the player is the entering object, then we're going to make it fall. So just getting the start location that we set up right back here, and the end location that we set up right there, the NZ location. And we're going to lerp it together, set the actor's location, have it fall down. Once that's finished, once the player's fallen, we check to see if the sound effect is valid. If it is, we're going to delay it, fade it out. If it's not, we're just going to continue. We're going to get the current level name. We're just going to reset the level. This is just a level reset. And then re-enabling the input. For this instance, if the interactable falls, if it's not a player, if it's a box or a baller, etc., we're just going to do the same type of lerp. The only difference is going to be down here. We're going to check if the sound is valid. If it is, then we're going to fade it out, and then we're going to destroy the entering object, and then we're going to re-enable the input. If it's not valid, then we're just going to destroy the object and enable the input. In this instance, we didn't want to reset the level. As the player's choice, if they can reset the level and continue with less interactables in it, or if they want to go on without. Don't need that. Other than that, for the pit, I believe that is it for the reset pit. We also initialize a couple of arrays. We get the ball array, a box array, we get the player, and we also set hide walls as well. The hide walls function is the same function where you hide the walls as in the invisible tile blueprint. There we go. These arrays, the ball and the box array, we originally used to go through and check which one was put into, which one entered the reset pit here. But I decided against it because it was a lot more work than was actually necessary. If we just checked if it was the player that was the entering object, then we can have a different branch than if it was a non-player. If it's a non-player, we're just going to be doing the same thing regardless if it's a ball or a box. So it was a bit unnecessary to have these arrays. Alright. Finishing up that, I've only edited a couple other things in this to make it functional. The last thing that I had to really edit was the interactable here. I did add a couple things to the checking tile. I added the hide wall function to the BPI, blink, set visible, and check total uses. This is the original BPI that I used for checking if the radius was entered for the worn out tile originally. Alright. The only other thing that I need to work on was the interactable ball. The interactable ball was compatible with this mechanic. The only issue was checking to see if the reset pit was the target tile. So to do this, we had to go into the event graph. We initialized the reset pit right here, getting an array of reset pits, and then all we did was go into the find target tiles. We set up the for each loop like this one, but in this instance we set it up counting the number of spaces. So having a number of spaces of 4 or more means that you're going to be moving to open space. That means that you have the first number of spaces is the initial one, the ones that you're set in. The second is the first target that you're moving to. The third is the second target. The fourth would be the third target. So if the reset pit is essentially more than 2 squares away, then we're going to be doing this. We go and we set the reset pit tile to the old tile's neighbor in the opposite direction. So it's essentially 2 back from the second space from the reset pit, if that makes sense. We check to see if it's a neighbor. If it is, then we're going to set the push direction. We're going to make that the old tile. We're going to find this neighbor, make that the old tile. And then we're going to set the target tile to the reset pit tile. After that, we set that to, or we set is reset pit tile the target. And if it is, that will break the while loop, like we had set up for the worn out tile as well. And then going on through the other branches in this, we have number of spaces. If it equals 3, that means that there would be 1 space in between you and the reset pit. It would set the old tile as equal to the reset pit, set the old tile equal to the target pit, and then we're going to find the neighbor of the old tile in the opposite direction and set that to the old tile. So just the previous tile to the old tile. Then set the reset pit to stop the loop. And then going on to if there were no spaces in between you and the reset pit's the second target, and you're going to be pushing the ball into the pit. We're just setting the reset, or the target tile, which is the reset pit, as the reset pit tile. The reason we set each one of these as reset pit tile is so that when we go into the event graph, when we're going down through these conditionals. All we have to do is set it equal to reset pit tile for the actor's location, the target, for a lot of these, making it a lot easier to manage in the event graph here. Alright. If we go into the event graph again, we can look at how I set this up. I went through, is the reset pit tile the target? If it is, then we're going to go through each of these. Then we check for the number of spaces. Pardon? We check the number of spaces to see, in this instance, if it's not a worn out tile, if it's not a reset pit, maybe it's a tile that has an interactable in it, and it's a floor tile. Maybe it's a tile that is that's a wall, and the player can't enter it, or just a regular pit. In these instances, we just go through just timelining, having the ball move from the current tile to, in this instance, the old tile, if it is equal or greater than 2 spaces. And then if it's equal to 1 space, we're just going to set it down to this, right here. And it will go to the target tile. That means that it'll be pushed off into the edge, so on and so forth. And we're going to do the same thing that we have with the past few set of timelines that we have here, where we just reinitialize the number of spaces and stop the audio. Other than these changes that I made into the interactable ball, I didn't have to make any other changes into the worn out tile. Other than that, that's the rest of the mechanic. I appreciate you guys watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. Thank you.